The first crack of lightning illuminated the roiling sea, revealing waves that seemed to reach for the sky itself. In that brief, electric moment, I realized I was no longer the master of my fate. I was at the mercy of Neptune's fury. I'd always dreamed of solo sailing across the Atlantic. The challenge, the solitude, the raw connection with nature. It called to me like a siren's song. But as I clung to the helm of my 36-foot sloop, Wanderlust, I wondered if I'd been lured to my doom. The day had started like any other on my month-long voyage. I'd woken with the sun, checked my position, and set my course. The weather report promised clear skies and favorable winds. I remember smiling as I sipped my morning coffee, watching dolphins play in Wanderlust's wake. How quickly things can change at sea. By mid-afternoon, I noticed a darkening on the horizon. Not unusual, I told myself. Squalls come and go. I'd weathered my share already on this trip. Still, a nagging unease grew in the pit of my stomach as I watched the clouds build with unnatural speed. I battened down the hatches, reefed the sails, and strapped on my safety harness. Better safe than sorry, right? But as the wind began to howl and the first fat raindrops pelted the deck, I knew this was no ordinary storm. The temperature plummeted. The wind shifted erratically, forcing me to constantly adjust course. Waves crashed over the bow, sending icy spray into my face. I squinted against the salt and rain, struggling to maintain my bearings. That's when my troubles truly began. A particularly vicious gust caught the mainsail, nearly knocking Wanderlust on her side. I scrambled to release the sheet, my fingers numb and clumsy. As the boat righted itself, a sickening crack echoed across the deck. My heart sank as I saw the boom swinging wildly, partially detached from the mast. I needed to get it under control before it caused more damage, or worse, swept me overboard. Clipping my safety line to the jackline, I inched my way across the pitching deck. Each step was a battle against the wind and the waves that threatened to send me sprawling. Finally, reaching the mast, I struggled to secure the boom. The wind howled in my ears, drowning out my own grunts of exertion. Rain and sea spray blinded me. My hands, raw and bleeding from rope burn, slipped on the wet metal. A monstrous wave struck broadside. Wanderlust heeled sharply. For a heart-stopping moment, I dangled over the churning abyss, my safety harness the only thing between me and the icy Atlantic. As the boat righted itself, I slammed back against the mast, the impact knocking the wind from my lungs. Gasping, I managed to lash the boom in place. It wasn't pretty, but it would have to do. I stumbled back to the cockpit, every muscle screaming in protest. That's when I noticed the eerie quiet. The nav station, usually alive with the soft glow of instruments and the reassuring beep of the GPS, was dark, completely dead. I flipped switches frantically, praying for a response. Nothing. My stomach churned, and not just from the violent pitching of the boat. Without GPS, without my chart plotter, I was flying blind. In the storm's chaos, I'd lost all sense of direction. For all I knew, I could be headed straight for the shipping lanes or worse, towards treacherous shoals. I fumbled for the backup handheld GPS in my emergency kit. The screen flickered weakly, then died. My hands shook as I changed the batteries. Still nothing. Was it the storm interfering with the signal? Or had my electronics been fried by a lightning strike I hadn't even noticed in the cacophony? Swallowing my panic, I reached for the satellite phone, my last link to the outside world. My fingers trembled as I dialed the emergency Coast Guard frequency. Static. Just endless mocking static. I was alone. Truly, terrifyingly alone. Night fell, plunging me into a darkness so absolute it felt like a physical weight. The storm raged on, wind shrieking through the rigging like a banshee's wail. Lightning offered brief, disconnected glimpses of the chaos towering waves, writhing clouds, the lonely speck of my boat tossed like a toy in a child's tantrum. I lashed myself to the helm, fighting to keep Wanderlust's bow pointed into the waves. If we got broadside to those mountains of water, we'd capsize in an instant. My arms ached from the constant strain. My eyes burned from the salt and exhaustion. How long had I been at this? Hours? Days? Time lost all meaning in the storm's fury. A sound cut through the wind's howl. At first I thought I'd imagined it. But there it was again, a low, mournful moan, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice pathetically small against the storm's roar. "Is someone there?" Silence, just the wind and waves. Then, thump. Something had struck the hull. I peered over the side, straining to see through the darkness and spray. Nothing but angry, frothing water. Thump, thump. There it was again, stronger this time, deliberate, as if something or someone was knocking. "Hey!" I yelled. "Hey! I'm here!" Foolish, I knew. If someone was out there in this maelstrom, they'd never hear me. And how could anyone be out there? I was hundreds of miles from land, from shipping lanes, from anything. The thumping grew more insistent. No longer muffled by the water, it seemed to be coming from below deck. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. I was alone on this boat. I knew I was alone. So what the hell was making that noise? Lightning flashed again. In that brief illumination, I saw a dark shape move past one of the portholes, inside the cabin. I stumbled back, my safety line jerking taut. This couldn't be happening. It was exhaustion, fear, my mind playing tricks on me. It had to be. The thumping grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to get out, or trying to get in. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Do I investigate? Try to secure the cabin? Or do I stay here where at least I can see the danger coming? Another flash of lightning. This time I could have sworn I saw a face pressed against the glass. Pale, distorted, hungry. I squeezed my eyes shut. "It's not real," I muttered. "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." The thumping stopped. I counted to 10, then slowly opened my eyes. The cabin door, just a few feet away, remained firmly shut. No sound but the eternal howl of the wind. Had I imagined it all? Creak. My blood turned to ice. That was the distinctive sound of the cabin door opening. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch in mute horror as the door slowly swung wide. Darkness. Impenetrable darkness within. Then, movement. Something emerging from the shadows. Pale, glistening, reaching for me with long, twisted fingers. I screamed. The primal sound tore from my throat, raw and terrified. I scrambled backwards, forgetting in my panic that I was still tethered to the boat. The safety line pulled taut, and I sprawled onto the deck. "No, no, no, no," I babbled, trying to unclip the harness with trembling hands. Part of me knew that releasing it was suicide in these conditions, but blind animal panic had taken over. Just as my numb fingers finally worked the clasp free, a massive wave struck. Wanderlust pitched violently. I felt myself being lifted, weightless for a moment, before the sea swallowed me whole. The cold hit like a physical blow, driving the air from my lungs. Instinct took over. I kicked hard, fighting my way back to the surface. My head broke through and I gasped, choking on a mixture of air and spray. "Help!" I screamed, though I knew it was useless. "Somebody help me!" I caught a glimpse of Wanderlust, tossing in the waves. Already the current was carrying me away from her, my only sanctuary in this vast, uncaring ocean. Something brushed against my leg. I thrashed wildly, images of sharks drawn by my thrashing flashing through my mind. But the touch was too deliberate, too purposeful. A hand closed around my ankle. I took one final desperate breath before being yanked beneath the waves. Underwater, everything muted. The storm's fury became distant, almost peaceful. I opened my eyes, the salt stinging, and found myself staring into a face. My own face. Pale, bloated, very, very dead. It smiled at me with blue lips and reached out with corpse-stiff arms. I woke up screaming. Tangled in my sleeping bag, drenched in sweat, I fought my way free and stumbled onto Wanderlust's deck. Sunlight blinded me. Sunlight and calm seas stretching to the horizon. I fell to my knees, gasping. A dream. It had all been a dream. Except, I looked down at my hands, raw and scraped, the secured boom with its clumsy lashing, the nav station still dark and lifeless. Not all of it had been a dream then. I ran my hands through my salt-stiff hair, trying to make sense of it all. How much had been real? How much a product of fear, exhaustion, and isolation? Did it even matter? I was alive. Wanderlust was battered but still seaworthy. The sun was shining. I took a deep breath, savoring the clean, salt air. Then I got to work. I had a lot of repairs to make, and who knew when the next storm might hit. As I worked to fix the boom properly, I hummed to myself, an old sea shanty my grandfather taught me. I pointedly ignored the whisper of doubt in the back of my mind, the voice that said I didn't remember falling asleep last night, the voice that wondered how I had gotten back on the boat. The gentle lapping of water against the hull turned sinister as I realized our predicament. What had started as a perfect day on the lake was rapidly becoming a nightmare, one that threatened to drag us into the depths as the sun sank below the horizon. I'll never forget the moment everything changed. We were laughing, my wife Sarah expertly maneuvering our little pontoon boat across the glassy surface of Lake Champlain. Our kids, Emily and Jake, squealed with delight as they trailed their hands in the cool water. The late afternoon sun painted everything in warm, golden hues. "Dad, I see the sandbar!" Jake shouted, pointing eagerly towards a distant stretch of beach. It was our favorite spot, a secluded little cove perfect for swimming and picnics. I ruffled his hair. "Good eye, buddy. What do you say we head over there for a quick dip before dinner?" Sarah raised an eyebrow at me. "It's getting kind of late, don't you think? We should probably start heading back soon." I waved away her concern. "Oh, come on, it's not even 6 yet. We've got plenty of daylight left." She hesitated, then shrugged. "All right, but just for a little bit. If only I'd listened to her. If only we'd turned back then." We were about halfway to the sandbar when the engine sputtered. Sarah frowned, adjusting the throttle. The engine coughed, then roared back to life. "Huh," she said. That was weird. A knot of unease formed in my stomach. "Maybe we should head back," I suggested, my earlier enthusiasm evaporating. Sarah nodded, already turning the wheel. The engine growled as she opened up the throttle. We'd barely gone 100 yards when it happened again. This time the sputter lasted longer. The boat slowed, drifting lazily across the water. "Daddy," Emily's voice quavered. "What's happening?" "It's okay, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "The engine's just being a little funny. Mom will get it sorted out." Sarah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She muttered under her breath as she worked the throttle, trying to coax the engine back to life. It coughed weakly, then fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. "Try it again," I said, fighting to keep the panic out of my voice. Sarah turned the key. Nothing. Not even a sputter. "Shit," she whispered, then immediately clapped a hand over her mouth, glancing guiltily at the kids. I took a deep breath. "Okay, let's not panic. I'm sure it's just flooded or something. I'll take a look." I made my way to the back of the boat, lifting the engine cover. I stared at the mess of wires and metal, realizing I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at. I'm an accountant, for crying out loud. The most mechanical thing I do is change the batteries in the TV remote. Honey?" Sarah's voice was tight. "We've got another problem." I turned to see her crouched by the side of the boat, her hand trailing in the water. When she pulled it out, her fingers were wet almost to the elbow. "We're taking on water," she said. The knot in my stomach turned to lead. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Okay, we can handle this. Kids, I need you to find the life jackets. Put them on, okay?" Emily nodded solemnly, but Jake's lower lip trembled. "Are we going to sink, Daddy?" "No, buddy, we're not going to sink. We're just being extra careful, okay?" He nodded, not looking convinced. I turned back to Sarah. "There's got to be something we can use to bail, right? Buckets or, I don't know, cups or something." She was already rummaging through the storage compartments. "I've got the kids' sand pails and a Tupperware container. That's it." I grabbed the plastic pail. "It'll have to do. You take the Tupperware. Maybe we can at least slow it down." We set to work, scooping water and dumping it overboard. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. For every bucket we bailed, it seemed like 2 more seeped in. The sun continued its relentless descent, the golden glow fading to dusky purple. I glanced at my watch. 7:30. How had it gotten so late so fast? "Mommy? Daddy? I'm scared," Emily whimpered. Sarah paused in her bailing to wrap an arm around our daughter. "It's okay, sweetie. We're going to be fine. Someone will come looking for us soon." But even as she said it, I saw the doubt in her eyes. We hadn't told anyone where we were going. It was a spur-of-the-moment trip, a chance to enjoy one of the last warm days of summer. Now that spontaneity might cost us everything. I looked around, desperately searching for any signs of other boats. The lake stretched vast and empty in every direction. The distant shore was a dark smudge on the horizon, impossibly far away. Maybe we should try swimming for it, I suggested half-heartedly. Sarah shook her head. It's too far, and the water's freezing. We'd never make it. She was right, of course, but the alternative, staying here, slowly sinking into the dark water, seemed unbearable. The light was fading fast now. I fumbled for my phone, cursing as I realized it was nearly dead. No signal either, of course. Does anyone see any lights? I asked, squinting into the gathering gloom. Other boats? Anything? Silence. Just the quiet lapping of water against the hull and our own ragged breathing. I'm cold, Jake said, his teeth chattering. I pulled him close, wrapping my arms around him. Emily huddled against Sarah. We huddled together in the middle of the boat, watching the water creep higher. Tell us a story, Daddy, Emily said suddenly, like you do when there's a thunderstorm and we're scared. My throat tightened. Of course, sweetheart. What kind of story do you want to hear? A happy one, Jake mumbled against my chest. With a good ending. I swallowed hard. Okay, once upon a time there was a brave family who loved to go on adventures. I spun a tale of heroic deeds and narrow escapes, my voice growing hoarse as the night deepened around us. The kids hung on every word, and even Sarah managed a weak smile at some of the sillier parts. But I couldn't help noticing how the boat sat lower in the water with each passing minute, how the temperature dropped as night fully settled in, how very, very alone we were. It was well past midnight when I saw it, a pinprick of light in the distance. At first I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion and fear, but no, it was there, growing steadily larger. Sarah, I whispered, not daring to hope. Sarah, look. She lifted her head from where it rested on Emily's hair. Her eyes widened as she saw what I was pointing at. Is that... A boat, I breathed. It's a boat. The kids stirred, groggy and confused. What's happening? Jake mumbled. Help is coming, I said, my voice cracking with relief. We're going to be okay. Sarah was already on her feet, waving her arms frantically. Here, she shouted. We're here, help us! I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so badly I could barely turn it on. The screen's glow was pitifully weak, but I waved it like a beacon anyway. The light grew larger, resolving into the running lights of a small fishing boat. I could hear the steady thrum of its engine now, growing louder by the second. Hey, a gruff voice called out. You folks okay? I could have wept at the sound. Our engine died, I shouted back. We're taking on water. The fishing boat drew alongside us and I saw our rescuer clearly for the first time. He was an older man, weathered face creased with concern. Christ, he muttered, taking in our waterlogged boat and our exhausted, terrified faces. You're lucky I was out checking my night lines. Here, let's get you folks aboard. The next few minutes were a blur. The fisherman, Bob, he said his name was, helped us transfer to his boat. Our poor pontoon was listing badly now, more than half submerged. As Bob's boat purred to life, pointing us towards the distant shore, I held Sarah and the kids close. We were safe. We were alive. The first hints of dawn were painting the sky as we finally stepped onto solid ground. I've never been so grateful to feel earth beneath my feet. Bob refused any payment, waving away our tearful thanks. Just doing what anyone would do, he said gruffly. You folks get some rest, and maybe invest in some swimming lessons, yeah. We managed a weak laugh at that. Later, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot cocoa in the marina's office while we waited for a ride home, Sarah turned to me. You know, she said softly, that story you were telling the kids, about the brave family on an adventure? I nodded, wondering where she was going with this. She squeezed my hand. I think we just lived it. I looked at our children, exhausted but safe, and felt a lump form in my throat. Yeah, I said. I guess we did. As we drove home, the sun finally cresting the horizon, I made a silent vow. We'd go out on the lake again someday. But next time, we'd be prepared for anything. Because sometimes the most important part of an adventure is making it home to tell the tale. The roar of the rapids drowned out my scream as I plunged into the icy water. In that moment, suspended between the furious current and the fading daylight, I realized my solo kayaking adventure had become a fight for survival. I've always been drawn to the wilderness, to the raw challenge of pitting myself against nature. That's why I found myself on the Yukon River in late September, long after most sane paddlers had packed up for the season. The fall colors were at their peak, painting the landscape in a riot of reds and golds. The air had that crisp, clean scent that only comes with the first hint of winter. It was supposed to be a week-long solo trip, a chance to clear my head and test my skills before the river froze over. I'd done my research, plotted my course carefully. But as I was about to learn, the Yukon is unforgiving of even the smallest mistakes. The day had started well enough. I broke camp at dawn, eager to make good time before the notoriously fickle weather turned. The river was running high and fast, swollen with late-season rains. It made for exhilarating paddling, my kayak skimming over the surface like a water strider. I should have known better, should have recognized the danger signs, but I was drunk on adrenaline and the wild beauty surrounding me. When I heard the distant roar of rapids ahead, I grinned. A challenge, an opportunity to prove myself. I've run rapids before, of course, but always with a team, always with careful scouting beforehand. This time, caught up in the moment, I charged in blind. The first standing wave caught me by surprise, larger than I'd anticipated. I managed to power through it, but it threw off my rhythm. The second wave slammed into me broadside. I felt my kayak tilt dangerously. Time seemed to slow. I saw the sky wheeling above me, felt the shock of frigid water. Then I was under, tumbling in the chaotic current. Years of training kicked in. I tucked, protecting my head as I was tossed like a rag doll. My lungs burned. I fought the urge to gasp, knowing it would mean a deadly lungful of water. Finally, I broke the surface. I gulped air, blinking water from my eyes. My kayak was nowhere in sight. The shore seemed impossibly far away, the current still dragging me downstream at an alarming rate. I'm a strong swimmer, but the combination of the freezing water and the powerful current was overwhelming. My limbs felt leaden, my movements sluggish. Each stroke was a battle against the river's relentless pull. A jagged rock loomed ahead. I barely managed to avoid smashing into it, the rough surface scraping my arm as I pushed off. The pain cleared my head somewhat. I needed to get out of the water and fast. I spotted a calmer eddy near the shore and angled towards it. My muscles screamed in protest. The cold was seeping into my bones despite my dry suit. By the time I dragged myself onto the rocky bank, I was shaking uncontrollably. For a long moment, I just lay there, gasping. The gravity of my situation slowly sank in. I was soaked, rapidly losing body heat. Night was falling. I had no kayak, no gear, no food. My emergency kit, with its GPS beacon and first aid supplies, was long gone. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling a little. I had to move to get my blood flowing. But which way? In the fading light, the shoreline looked unfamiliar. Had I been swept further downstream than I thought? A gust of wind cut through my wet clothes like a knife. I hugged myself, teeth chattering. Think, I told myself. What's the first priority? Shelter. I needed to get out of the wind, to have any hope of warming up. I scanned the tree line looking for anything that might offer protection. That's when I saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. So faint I thought I might be imagining it. I squinted, willing my eyes to pierce the gathering gloom. There it was again, a warm, steady glow. A cabin? Hope surged through me. If I could reach it, I might have a chance, but it was far, at least a mile by my reckoning. And between me and that beacon of hope lay a stretch of dense forest, growing darker by the minute. I took a hesitant step towards the trees, then stopped. Was I being foolish? The smart move would be to stay put, to find what shelter I could near the river, to wait for rescue. But would rescue come? I hadn't filed a detailed trip plan. No one knew exactly where I was, and with winter closing in, how long before someone came looking? The wind gusted again, and I made my decision. I couldn't stay here. I'd freeze long before anyone found me. I forced my numb legs to move, stumbling towards the tree line. Each step was a struggle. My wet clothes dragged at me, the chill seeping deeper with every passing minute. The forest was a maze of shadows. Branches clawed at my face and arms. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. More than once I lost sight of that distant light. Each time panic clawed at my throat until I spotted it again. Time lost all meaning. I existed in a haze of cold and pain. My world narrowed to putting one foot in front of the other. Keep moving. Just keep moving. I don't know how long I'd been walking when I heard it. A low growl off to my right. I froze, my heart pounding. Slowly I turned my head. A pair of yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness. Wolf. Terror gave me a burst of energy. I ran, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for stealth. Branches whipped my face. I could hear panting behind me, the soft thud of paws on the forest floor. I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a stop. The cabin loomed before me, dark and silent. No welcoming light. No smoke from the chimney. Had I imagined it? Had I followed a will-o'-the-wisp, leading me deeper into danger? A twig snapped behind me. I whirled, expecting to see slavering jaws. Nothing. The forest was still. No sign of my pursuer. I turned back to the cabin, desperation overriding caution. 3 stumbling steps brought me to the door. I pounded on it with what little strength I had left. Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help. Silence. I tried the handle. Locked. A sob of frustration escaped me. So close. I was so close to safety. I circled the cabin, looking for another way in. A window, maybe, that I could break. Anything. That's when I saw it. Half hidden by overgrown bushes, a cellar door. My numb fingers scrabbled at the latch. Please, please, please. It opened with a rusty shriek. I nearly wept with relief. I didn't care if it was full of spiders or worse. It was shelter, a chance to get out of the wind, to warm up. I lowered myself carefully into the darkness. The cellar smelled of damp earth and old wood. My feet touched a dirt floor. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out shapes. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with jars and cans. A woodpile in one corner. And there, leaning against the far wall, an old oil lamp. My hands shook as I fumbled with the matches I found nearby. Please work, please work. The wick caught. Warm light flooded the cellar. I sat heavily on the floor, the adrenaline that had kept me going suddenly deserting me. I was safe, for now, at least. As feeling slowly returned to my extremities, bringing with it the pins and needles pain of warming flesh, I took stock of my situation. I had shelter. The canned goods would keep me from starving. There was even an old blanket folded on one of the shelves. But I was still in danger. Hypothermia was a very real threat, and I had no way to contact the outside world, no way to let anyone know where I was. I eyed the ladder leading up to the cabin proper. Breaking in would be wrong, I knew. But if there was a phone up there, some way to call for help. A sound from above made me freeze. Footsteps, slow, heavy, moving across the floor of the cabin. My breath caught. The cabin wasn't abandoned after all. Hope warred with fear. Would the owner help me, or would they see me as a threat, an intruder? The cellar door creaked open. A shaft of light spilled down the stairs. I squinted up, heart pounding. A gruff voice called out, "Who's down there? Come on out where I can see you." I swallowed hard. This was it, the moment of truth. "Please," I called, my voice hoarse. "I need help. I was kayaking and there was an accident." A pause. Then, "Aw, hell. All right, come on up. Let's get you warmed up." Relief washed over me, so intense I felt lightheaded. I climbed the stairs on shaky legs, emerging into the warmth of the cabin. My rescuer was a grizzled old man, all beard and flannel. He took one look at me and shook his head. "Damn fool. Out on the river this late in the season," he grumbled. But he was already moving, stoking the fire, pulling out dry clothes. As I sat wrapped in blankets, a mug of hot tea warming my hands, the old man, Jack he said his name was, radioed for help. "Rescue team will be here by morning," he said. "You're lucky. Real lucky." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Jack settled into a chair across from me. "So," he said, "while we wait, Why don't you tell me what possessed you to take on the Yukon solo in September? I managed a weak smile. It was going to be a long night, but I was alive, I was safe, and I had one hell of a story to tell. The moment I set foot on that pristine white deck, I knew something was wrong. The air hung heavy with the scent of fear and secrets, and the silence, that awful, oppressive silence, spoke volumes. Little did I know I was walking into a trap that would test every ounce of my training and resolve. My name is Sarah Reeves, and I've been with the Coast Guard for 8 years. I've seen my fair share of strange situations out on the water, but nothing could have prepared me for what awaited us on that abandoned yacht. It was a crisp autumn morning when we got the call. A passing cargo ship had spotted a luxury yacht drifting aimlessly about 30 miles off the coast of Maine. No distress signals, no response to radio hails. Just a ghost ship on a sea of glass. As our patrol boat approached, I felt a prickle of unease. The yacht was immaculate, a gleaming white behemoth that probably cost more than I'd make in 10 lifetimes. But there was no sign of life. No movement on deck, no faces peering out from behind the tinted windows. "I don't like this, Reeves," muttered my partner Mike. He was a veteran, 20 years on the job, and I'd learned to trust his instincts. I nodded, keeping my voice low. "Yeah, something's off. Keep your eyes peeled." We circled the yacht once, calling out and waiting for a response. Nothing. Following protocol, we prepared to board. The moment my boots hit the deck, that feeling of wrongness intensified. Everything was too perfect, too untouched. No signs of struggle. No evidence of why a multi-million-dollar vessel would be abandoned in the middle of the ocean. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing across the empty deck. "U.S. Coast Guard. Is anyone on board?" Silence, just the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. Mike and I exchanged glances. We'd done this dance before, clear the deck, then move to the interior. But something made me hesitate before reaching for the door to the main cabin. "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. "Do you smell that?" Mike frowned, sniffing the air. "Cleaning products? Maybe." "Yeah, but stronger than it should be. Like someone went overboard trying to cover something up." He nodded grimly. "All right, masks on. Could be nothing, could be something nasty." We donned our respirators and I reached for the door handle. It turned easily, swinging open to reveal a luxurious interior. Plush carpets, leather sofas, a bar that probably cost more than my annual salary. And still, that unsettling emptiness. We moved cautiously through the main salon, checking corners, looking for any sign of recent occupation. Everything was immaculate, but there was an artificial feel to it, like a showroom, not a lived-in space. "Galley's clear," Mike's voice crackled over the radio. "Moving to the lower deck." "Copy that," I replied. "I'll check the master suite." I climbed the curved staircase, my hand never leaving the butt of my sidearm. The upper deck was as pristine as the rest of the yacht, but as I approached the master suite, that chemical smell grew stronger. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly, sweeping the room with my flashlight. The bedroom was a study in luxury, all cream-colored silk and polished wood. But my eye was drawn to a dark stain on the carpet near the foot of the bed. I knelt down, examining it closer. The stain was barely visible, as if someone had scrubbed it furiously. But I'd seen enough crime scenes to recognize the telltale brown of dried blood. "Mike," I said into my radio, keeping my voice low. "I've got blood up here. Looks like someone tried to clean it up." His reply was immediate. "Shit! All right, I'm coming up." "Don't touch anything else." I stood, sweeping my flashlight around the room again. That's when I noticed it. A small safe in the corner, its door hanging open. Empty. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just an abandoned ship. This was a crime scene. I heard Mike's footsteps on the stairs and turned towards the door. That's when all hell broke loose. The yacht's engines roared to life, the sudden vibration nearly knocking me off my feet. I stumbled, grabbing the doorframe for support. "Mike!" "Heh!" I shouted. "What's happening?" His voice came back breathless and tinged with panic. "We've got company. 2 speedboats coming in fast, hostile." My mind raced. This was no coincidence. The abandoned yacht, the cleaned-up crime scene, it was all a setup. and we'd walked right into it. I sprinted down the stairs, meeting Mike in the main salon. Through the windows, I could see the speedboats approaching rapidly. Dark figures crouched low. "We need to get off this boat," Mike said, his face pale beneath his respirator. I nodded. "The tender, if we can launch it." A burst of gunfire cut me off, bullets shattering the windows. We dove for cover behind a plush sofa. "So much for that plan," Mike grunted. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging. We were outgunned and outnumbered, trapped on a yacht that was quickly becoming a war zone. "Think, Sarah, think." "The engine room," I said suddenly. "If we can get down there, maybe we can disable the yacht. Buy ourselves some time." Mike nodded. "Worth a shot. On 3. I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on my sidearm. 3. We sprinted for the stairs leading below deck, the sound of breaking glass and pounding footsteps close behind. I risked a glance back and saw dark figures pouring onto the main deck. The lower level was a maze of narrow corridors. We rounded a corner and there it was, the heavy door marked Engine Room. Mike reached it first, yanking on the handle. "Locked!" I shouldered past him, pulling out my multi-tool. "Cover me!" My hands were shaking as I worked on the lock. The sound of boots on metal grew louder. They were coming. "Hurry!" Mike hissed. The lock finally gave way with a satisfying click. We tumbled into the engine room, slamming the door behind us. The roar of the engines was deafening. Banks of equipment lined the walls, dials and readouts blinking in the dim light. "Now what?" Mike shouted over the noise. I scanned the room frantically. "We need to shut it down. Look for the main fuel line." We split up, searching the cramped space. My eyes darted from pipe to pipe, trying to make sense of the complex system. A pounding on the door made me jump. They'd found us. "Reeves," Mike's voice. "Over here." He was standing by a large valve, painted red, the main fuel cutoff. I rushed over, grabbing it with both hands. It was stiff, resisting my efforts to turn it. The door shuddered under the impact of what had to be a battering ram. It wouldn't hold much longer. "Come on," I growled, straining against the valve. Mike added his strength to mine. With a groan of protesting metal, the valve finally turned. The effect was immediate. The engine's roar began to stutter and die. The sudden silence was almost as deafening as the noise had been. In that moment of quiet, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Ticking. My eyes met Mike's. We'd both heard it. "Oh, shit," he breathed. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The yacht wasn't just a trap. It was a bomb. The door burst open. Dark figures poured in, weapons raised. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. Mike and I reacted on pure instinct, diving for cover. The confines of the engine room worked in our favor, making it hard for our attackers to maneuver. I don't know how long the firefight lasted, seconds, maybe minutes that felt like hours. All I know is that when the smoke cleared, Mike and I were still standing. Our attackers weren't. But we had a bigger problem. That ticking hadn't stopped. "We need to get off this boat," Mike said, his voice tight with pain. He'd taken a graze to the arm. I nodded, my mind racing. The tender's out, and they've probably disabled our patrol boat, so we swim. I met his eyes. We both knew the odds. The water was freezing, the current strong. If hypothermia didn't get us, exhaustion would. But staying wasn't an option. We made our way back to the main deck, moving as fast as we dared. Every second that ticked by could be our last. As we emerged into the sunlight, I saw that our situation was even worse than I'd feared. The speedboats were gone. So was our patrol boat. We were alone on a floating bomb in the middle of the ocean. "There," Mike pointed, a life raft still in its canister strapped to the railing. We sprinted for it, our boots pounding on the deck. The yacht felt like a living thing beneath us, vibrating with malevolent energy. I reached the life raft first, fumbling with the straps. Come on," I muttered. A hand landed on my shoulder. I looked up to see Mike's grim face. "No time," he said. "We jump. Now." I hesitated for a split second, then nodded. He was right. We were out of options. We climbed onto the railing. The ocean stretched out before us, cold and unforgiving. Mike squeezed my shoulder. Together, I managed a tight smile. Together. We jumped, The shock of the cold water drove the air from my lungs. I surfaced, gasping, and saw Mike a few yards away doing the same. "Swim!" he shouted. "As far as you can!" I struck out, my arms and legs already feeling leaden in the frigid water. We'd made it maybe 50 yards when the world exploded behind us. The force of the blast lifted me like a rag doll, slamming me back into the water. For a moment, I was sure I was going to die. Then survival instinct kicked in and I clawed my way back to the surface. The yacht was gone. In its place was a column of smoke and flame, debris raining down around us. The ocean was chaos, waves tossing us about like corks. "Mike!" I shouted. "Mike! Here!" His voice, weak but there. I swam towards him, fighting the waves. When I reached him, I saw he was struggling to stay afloat. "My arm!" he gasped. "Think it's broken." I looped my arm around him, trying to keep us both above water. But I knew we couldn't last long like this. That's when I heard it, a distant thrumming that quickly grew louder. Helicopter. I looked up, blinking salt water from my eyes, and there it was, a Coast Guard rescue chopper heading straight for us. I laughed, a sound of pure relief that bordered on hysteria. Mike managed a weak chuckle beside me. "Told you, swimming was a good idea," he mumbled. As the helicopter drew closer, its downdraft whipping the waves into a frenzy, I held onto Mike tightly. We'd made it. Against all odds, we'd survived. But as the rescue diver plunged into the water nearby, I knew our ordeal wasn't over. Someone had set that trap for us. Someone had been willing to kill to keep their secrets, and I was damn well going to find out who. The first whisper came just as the last flicker of sunlight faded from the sky. A soft, sibilant sound that could have been the wind through the cypress trees, or maybe just my imagination. But as the mist thickened around our stranded boat, I realized with growing dread that we were not alone in this God-forsaken swamp. I never should have agreed to this trip. But when your teenage son, who's been drifting away from you since the divorce, suddenly shows interest in spending time together, you jump at the chance. Even if it means venturing into the murky backwaters of the Louisiana Bayou for a nighttime fishing expedition. "It'll be an adventure, Dad," Jake had said, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. "Just you and me like old times. How could I say no to that?" So here we were, in a rented flat-bottom boat, our fishing rods forgotten as we tried to coax the sputtering outboard motor back to life. The sun had set with alarming speed, plunging the swamp into a darkness so thick it felt like a living thing. "Try it again, Dad," Jake urged, his voice tight with an anxiety he was trying hard to mask. I yanked the starter cord for what felt like the 100th time. The motor coughed weakly, then fell silent. "Damn it," I muttered, then immediately felt guilty for cursing in front of Jake. Not that he hadn't heard worse at school, but old habits die hard. "It's okay, Dad," Jake said, trying to sound brave. "We've got the oars, right? We can paddle back." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I didn't have the heart to tell him that in the darkness, with the mist rolling in, I had no idea which direction Nabaka was. We each took an oar, our strokes uncoordinated at first, but gradually finding a rhythm. The boat moved sluggishly through the black water, tendrils of mist curling around the oars like grasping fingers. That's when I heard it again, a whisper, clearer this time, words I couldn't quite make out, but definitely not the wind. "Dad?" Jake's voice quavered. "Did you hear that?" So it wasn't just my imagination. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's probably just the wind in the trees, buddy. Nothing to worry about." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. The air was dead still, heavy with moisture and the cloying scent of decaying vegetation. We paddled on in silence, the only sounds the gentle splash of our oars and our own ragged breathing. The mist grew thicker, until I could barely see Jake at the other end of the boat. Suddenly, a shape loomed out of the fog. I jerked back, nearly dropping my oar, before realizing it was just a gnarled old cypress tree, its branches draped with Spanish moss that looked disturbingly like hanging corpses in the gloom. "Dad, I'm scared," Jake whispered, his teenage bravado crumbling. "It's okay, son," I said, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. We'll be all right. We just need to. A splash off to our right cut me off mid-sentence. Something big had just entered the water. What was that? Jake's voice was high with panic. Probably just a gator, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. They're more scared of us than we are of them. Another lie. In that moment, I didn't think anything could be more terrified than I was. We picked up our pace, muscles burning with the effort of forcing the boat through the viscous water. The whispers grew louder, seeming to come from all around us now. I still couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably malevolent. A low branch scraped across the top of my head, and I ducked instinctively. "Keep your head down, Jake," I called out. "These trees are—" My warning was cut short by Jake's scream. I looked up to see him batting frantically at something on his shoulder. In the dim light, I could just make out a large spider, its legs splayed across Jake's shirt. "Hold still," I shouted, lunging forward. I swatted the arachnid away, sending it flying into the murky water. Jake was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with terror. "I want to go home, Dad," he sobbed. "I want to go home." "I know, buddy," I said, pulling him into a hug. "I know. We're going to get out of here, I promise." As I held him, I felt something brush against my leg under the water. I froze, praying it was just a fish or a piece of driftwood. But then I felt it again, more insistent this time. Something was circling the boat. I slowly reached for the flashlight we'd brought along, praying the batteries weren't dead. The beam flickered to life, weak but present. I aimed it at the water. For a moment, all I saw was our reflection in the inky surface. Then something moved, a long, sinuous shape just below the surface, too big to be a fish, too long to be a gator. I jerked the light away, my heart pounding. "Jake," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need you to very slowly pick up your oar. We're going to paddle as quietly as we can, okay?" He nodded, his face pale in the dim light. We began to move, each stroke as gentle as we could make it, while still propelling us forward. The whispers grew louder. I could almost make out words now, but they weren't in any language I recognized. They seemed to be coming from the trees themselves, as if the whole swamp was alive and aware of our presence. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness to our left, then another to our right. Something was moving through the trees, pacing us. "Dad?" Jake's voice was barely audible. "I hear it," I whispered back. "Just keep paddling. Don't look around." But of course, telling a scared teenager not to look is like telling water not to be wet. Jake's head swiveled left and right, his eyes wide with terror. "There's something out there," he hissed. I saw eyes, red eyes. I was about to tell him he was imagining things when I saw them too. Pinpricks of crimson light floating a few feet above the water, and they were moving, keeping pace with our boat. The whispering rose to a fever pitch, no longer sibilant but harsh and guttural. The mist seemed to thicken, pressing in on us from all sides. That's when Jake's oar struck something solid underwater. There was a moment of resistance, then a sickening crack as the wood splintered. "No!" Jake cried out as half of his oar disappeared into the murky depths. I knew we couldn't keep going with just 1.5 oars. We were sitting ducks. "Jake," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "I need you to trust me. We're going to have to swim for it." His eyes widened in horror. But the thing in the water, and the gators—" "I know, buddy, but we can't stay here. Now listen carefully. When I say go, we're going to flip the boat over to use as a flotation device. We'll kick with our legs and use our arms to guide it. Okay?" He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, Dad." "All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. We heaved, flipping the small boat over. The shock of the cold water drove the breath from my lungs, but I forced myself to focus. I helped Jake position himself on one side of the overturned hull, taking the other side myself. "Kick!" I shouted. "Kick as hard as you can!" We thrashed through the water, the boat providing some protection and buoyancy. The whispers had risen to a roar now, and I could swear I heard splashing behind us. I don't know how long we swam. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish fog. My legs and arms burned with exhaustion, but terror kept me going. Jake's ragged breathing beside me was the only thing that mattered. As long as I could hear that, I knew he was still with me. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, my feet struck something solid. Mud, then roots. We were nearing the shore. "We're almost there, Jake," I gasped. "Just a little further." We half swam, half crawled the last few yards, collapsing onto the muddy bank. For a long moment we just lay there, gulping air. Then Jake started to laugh. It was a hysterical sound at first, but gradually it softened into something genuine. I found myself joining in, the release of tension overwhelming. As our laughter died down, I realized something. The whispers had stopped. The mist was thinning. In the distance I could see lights. Civilization. I pulled Jake into a hug, feeling his shoulders shake with a mixture of laughter and leftover sobs. "We made it, buddy," I whispered. "We're okay." As we stumbled towards the distant lights, supporting each other, I knew we'd been through something that defied explanation. But we'd faced it together. And somehow, I felt closer to my son than I had in years. The swamp had tried to swallow us whole. Instead, it had given me back my boy. And for that, I was almost grateful. Almost.